welcome back to Fresh Outlook on TWB. We've been discussing the explosion of all things sci-fi across the globe, but what about the power of fandom? I want to open up a conversation to that concept, this phenomenon of fandom. Some people are comparing fandom to a cult. Do you see them as one and the same? A lot of people shaking your head. Let's start with Kenya.
Fandom is a social thing. It's a way of people getting together. Conventions in particular is a way of being around people who are like-minded. You share the same interests and sometimes the same values. Not always. It's a very diverse community. And now with the internet, I have friends around the world that I never would have had if it wasn't for the internet. We all share similar interests. We communicate back and forth. We discuss episodes or books or movies that we like and debate it. It opens a dialogue, and the world became so much smaller when that happened.
Barna, from your sort of academic perspective as a scholar, what do you think of fandom? Some also compare it to sort of a religion. It's a religious experience.
I would be more comfortable using the word religion more than cult, because usually what you notice when people give reasons for why they become fans of certain things, someone will choose Star Trek versus Star Wars or Harry Potter. They will always say that the reason is because what I love so much has an embedded value system that's very similar to my value system. You know, Star Trek fan will say that, well, I love Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek creator's philosophy for the future, and that's similar to my philosophy. So I find that similarity between our identities. So that's closer to a belief system of some might share with religion. And there are people in the world who will identify themselves as Jedi, for example.
Right. A little cuckoo, but you know, maybe not so much. Didi, what do you think? Is this a religious experience when we talk about fandom and sci-fi?
I think it's all positive, wonderful. You know, it's a big gathering and party. And as far as a religion, no. I mean, you know, you've got a lot of like-minded folks that appreciate the shows we're talking about, whether it be Star Trek, Star Wars, or all of the above. But I want to go to fandom, so I want to get the tips on that, because I think that would be an experience that everyone should have. And because think about it, you've got people that like what you do, and they're from, who knows, Africa, England, California. So that's so much fun to have so many people in one place that have similar interests. And I think it's nice socially, and it's nice to be able to talk about the episodes and the issues.
Do you think this might ever come to head, religious zealots and sci-fi zealots?
Oh, it already
Do you think
has.
we're wary of each other?
San Diego Comic-Con, you know you've made it when the Westboro Baptist Church protests you, they say. And they did. They showed up. But
what were they protesting?
Well, one of the things that Westboro learned very quickly is you never want to mess with college-educated people. And so they gave it right back to them. And they were standing out there with their signs. But just back up for a moment, for anyone not understanding the connection, why would a church protest a convention about sci-fi? Everything it stands for: learning, accomplishment, the future, positivity, education, anything. What do they rail against?
But isn't sci-fi a recreational activity? Or has it become something more?
Maybe they believe it's something more.
Are people?
They're pretty anti-science, and the minute you have the word science in your title, I think there's something to rail against. Gene Roddenberry, as an example, we were talking about Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry was talking about inclusion and hopefulness and things like that. Those are positive messages. Perhaps they were challenged because they think that science fiction is
it's just like in Star Wars, you're talking about the midichlorians. You've got all these midichlorians. It's Gnostic. I mean, it's sort of a Gnostic way of thinking, so evangelical would think that was bad. So it's fascinating if they really take a look at it, how they think that's anti-God, because it's more encompassing of the universe, and they just don't like that.
Go ahead.
That is an interesting point of view that Gene Roddenberry brought to Star Trek, which I can imagine rankling somewhere very fundamentally religious, where Roddenberry's always said that my vision of the future is one of humanistic values, that people can solve their own problems through logic, through science, and not so much mysticism or belief in magic. So we never explicitly said that I'm anti-religion, but you can read that message in there if you want to. And again, if you're fanatical about your religion.
Well, there's always been a clash with science and with religion if it's way on way on the right and way on the left. So that does happen. So, but it's interesting they go to the point of protesting.
Yeah, but I think they just look for press.
True.
Their MO.
From your perspectives, though, and the people you know, do you think there are a lot of spiritual people who identify with sci-fi specifically because of their faith?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
actually
are there as many who don't? I mean, do you think it's an even split?
I don't know what the split would be percentage-wise, but it's interesting that you mentioned this, because there was an article just recently that I was reading this week about some Christians that were expressing a desire to have more Christian science fiction, much like they did with music. They wanted Christian rock,
right?
And they're saying we need to have more Christians writing it, and really comes down to, then please go ahead and write it. You know,
be our guest.
It's up to you. I think the science part attracts people perhaps with less faith or none at all, because there's that system in place where science is, very
well, you have
logical.
to see it. It's logical. Scientists are like, wait a minute, the stories in the Bible, we don't know that.
Well, prove it is what
prove
they
it.
say. Yeah.
So that's where it's like, well, we don't have to prove it because that's our faith. So that's where it comes into play, where they clash.
Do you think that that there's a religion might feel threatened by that? I mean, that's
well, perhaps some. I think there's a difference between spirituality, feeling spiritual, and being religious, like to the T. It's like, well, this is, I mean, some people handle snakes because it talks about snakes in the Bible. Those are the folks who are going to go to the letter, and, they've got their own religion and they've got their own beliefs, so they're probably not going to agree necessarily with folks that are into science.
Let's talk a little bit about the community aspect of fandom, because these sci-fi conventions and the periphery have really become a community when you think about it, way different than just a few years back. So Ken, starting with you, speak to the strength of why has this community become so important for sci-fi fans?
Well, it's a place for, I'll use myself as an example, it's a place for me to meet friends that I normally wouldn't see that often, especially now with the internet. We gather in one place from around the world. And my event in November, as an example, I have people coming from all around the world. We're going to get together and hang out. And I have one friend who describes it as our once-a-year friends. That's what they describe convention as. You may only see these people the same time that year, but their relationship with you is still equally valid and still important, and you get to spend time with these people. And so that's what
I want to, not to interrupt you, but I do want to introduce you to two more friends in your sci-fi community. We should have Dr. Michael Jindra joining us via Skype. He's the professor of anthropology at the University of Notre Dame. There he is. Welcome, Dr. Jindra. And we also should have another friend to add to your list, Ken, is Willow Wilson. There she is. She's the author of the critically acclaimed books and comics, including Alif the Unseen. So there's Willow. Let's start with Willow. What do you think the importance of sort of the community perspective is when we're talking about sci-fi on a global level?
I think it's very important. I think, sci-fi and fantasy really started out as genres of the fringe, people who had something to say, something critical to say, maybe about politics, about society, and sci-fi and fantasy were a way of doing that while cloaking maybe your actual criticisms of particular movements or particular politicians. So I think the community aspect is very important because it allows people who are on kind of the bleeding edges of society to connect with one another in what I think is a very vital way.
Tell us about Alif the Unseen.
Alif the Unseen is a novel that I wrote that was published last year via Grove Press. It's about a young hacker in an unnamed Middle Eastern emirate who runs afoul of the law and has to go on the run with the girl next door, a genie who grants no wishes, and an old kind of ornery sheikh. So
Willow, I'm gonna cut you off, Willow. We're losing your connection, so we're gonna. Willow, we can't hear you, so we're gonna come back to you in just a moment and continue the conversation. I do want to go to Dr. Jindra for a moment. I'm curious to get your anthropological perspective on this sort of sci-fi surge and this notion of community.
Well, I think with it, people found ideas out there and an alternative universe, and then they get together around that. They find other people that are like-minded, and they go to conventions, and they talk about the canon of the show, and they go on pilgrimages and things like that. So it really is, in some ways, a quasi-religious phenomenon. It's something people find really serious. They find a lot of meaning into it, and they just kind of form groups.
But in terms of what do you tell your students? I mean, how will this change in years to come compared to how it's been up to this point?
Well, it's gotten. I mean, I studied Star Trek fans 20 years ago, so it's just gotten a lot more diverse. I mean, there's a lot more kinds of groups, fandom groups out there. Some are more, traditionally religious as far as with the traditional religions. Others are maybe more anti-religious. So there's just so much diversity out there. It's really hard to generalize. about it, and the diversity has gotten a lot more diverse. There's just so much out there now with the social media and with the internet than there was 20 years ago when Star Trek fandom, I think, really dominated a lot of the fandoms, and then maybe Star Wars. Now there's just so much more.
Right. All right. Well, Dr. Michael Jindra, thank you for your insights. We appreciate it. And Willow, if we could go back to you for a moment, if you're still there, just wanted to get a final word from you on sort of this idea of community and the importance when you in this global era of how sci-fi is really bringing us together in a time of hardship.
I think now sci-fi is more important than ever in terms of bringing people together, because I think regardless of our own cultural, political backgrounds, we're all united by imagination. And sci-fi really provides a universal outlet for that does cross cultural and political boundaries. So I think as the world becomes more globalized and we all become very much connected to each other, it's going to be an increasingly important genre, both for expression and for criticism.
Great. I think we're really all connected by our imagination. There's no discrimination in imagination. Very interesting. Thank you, Willow, for your insight.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we're out of time, but I want to thank you guys for your perspectives and your expertise on the subject. It really is a whole other world. So, you know, I feel like we just scratched the surface, but thanks, you guys.
Taryn, we have to go to Long Island to the Whovian.
Yes, please, come out in November.
What are you doing at 3?
Yes, there we go.
In November.
All right. Thanks, guys, again,
No
for your fresh outlooks, as always. I want to thank, once again, our all-star panel. Remember, if you have a fresh outlook, we want to hear about it. Let us know on our Facebook page, on our Twitter page. We're at AbrewTV or hashtag Fresh Outlook. I'm TWB or at TW Brill. Thank you so much for joining us as always. We'll see you right here next time on Fresh Outlook.